Hey there, it is your instructor, Richard Groner. This week has flown by. It is already Thursday afternoon, and I hadn't done my quick tip yet. And part of the reason is there is so much material in this module, just in chapter one alone. There are so many things that we could talk about. And I've had a hard time figuring out, okay, how do I pinpoint this down to a 5 or a 10-minute discussion? So I did pick something out to talk about. I'm going to go to share screen now. There are so many communication necessities that come into play with groups. And as you're reading chapter one, you'll see communication competence, which if you took Comm 102, you kind of already have a feeling for communication competence, appropriateness, effectiveness of our communication, knowing how to respond in situations, the concept of your emotional quotient, your social quotient, and understanding how to control your emotions and how to show your emotions and how to meet societal expectations with your communication, that kind of thing. All of that stuff is incredibly important for communicating in groups, because when you think about it, groups have a goal they have to achieve. And to do that, they are obviously going to have to communicate. One of the factors that comes into play, and this is discussed quite a bit in the chapter, is how culture comes into play in groups. There are known, studied practices that really successful groups have that are related to the concepts that we learned about in culture back in Comm 102. And probably one of the most important of those, the book kind of talks about this quite a bit as being one of the most important, is this idea of individualism versus collectivism. Individualism, of course, is the belief that I am number one, I'm the most important, everything revolves around me, all of that good stuff. And collectivism is doing things for society as a whole, or in our case, doing what's best for the group, even though that might not be what's best for me individually. And we have a lot of problems at times with that in this particular country, because obviously, if you look at the textbook talks about this, there's a chart in there. I think this chart's going to pop up in a minute. When you look at the range from all the way fully individualistic to all the way fully collectivistic, in that range, culturally, the United States is the most individualistic culture on earth. That's great if you're promoting self and if you're looking out for yourself as number one, but that's not how groups typically operate. So studies have found that really successful groups operate in a more collectivistic manner. So we have to really look at that and understand, what does that mean to us in the sense of groups. We're talking about the we philosophy, and we think of all of the work that has to be done and all of the obstacles that have to be overcome from a group standpoint. It's we collectively as a whole, not me. I'm not worried about, oh, well, if the group doesn't do well, but I do my part, then I still succeed. That's an individualistic view of how you approach groups. In a collectivistic view, it's I'm doing well, but these others aren't doing well. What can I do to help them so that we as a whole achieve our goal and everybody in the group looks good? And that's a difficult thing sometimes for people from the United States culture to understand, because again, we are such a individualistic society. So where you fall in that spectrum of individualism all the way over to collectivism can greatly influence your communication content, how you understand the importance of communication. It affects your norms and your ideas and your ethics. It also affects your approach to, okay, here's something I could do for the group, but I'm going to have to maybe lower my personal goals or not achieve my personal goals in order for the group to reach theirs. Typically in the United States, we fight that. Very individualistic societies fight that type of thinking, whereas in collectivistic societies, they view it as it's better for the group. That's what we need to do. and they hardly ever consider what's best for themselves, because what's best for themselves isn't always what's best for the group. So if you're anybody in here is a Star Trek fan, Spock used to say the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the few or the one. That's a collectivistic approach. The Vulcan system was a very collectivistic society. And that's why there was such a clash between that and like Kirk, who came from a very individualistic American approach to things. In groups, you want to try to be as collectivistic in your approach as possible. Now, here's that chart. This is straight out of the textbook. And you see highly individualistic cultures. United States is number one, Australia is number two, Great Britain's number three. This really shouldn't surprise anybody. And then you get over to the very collectivistics, Guatemala, Ecuador, Panama, Argentina. These are very collectivistic. They view everything in terms of what's best for the group as a whole. And then you've got some that are very in the middle. Typically, group work is better done by people from these particular groups than it is from here, because these folks have been from day one. Their mindset has always been looking out for themselves, not necessarily looking out for the group as a whole. So it's a very important element for, I'm skipping through this, for getting successful groups. Now, if you want to know where you personally fall on the scale, because just because the United States is the most individualistic society on the planet, you might fall somewhere else than the norm in that range. And it's good to kind of know where you fall in the individualistic to collectivistic scale. And the textbook on page 29 has a survey you can take. And when you take it, you get your results back. And then there's the solution to the results. It's in the textbook as well. But I highly recommend that you do that survey, because it will tell you where you fall. And it kind of indicates the challenge that you're going to have in working within groups, because if you fall in the very individualistic side of the scale, groups are going to be a little bit tougher, because you're going to be like, sometimes the group's floundering and the person's like, well, I'll just do this myself. I'll get it done. And that way it's just done. That's a very individualistic group. It doesn't viewpoint. It doesn't allow the group to succeed as a whole. Whereas when you see the group is floundering and you have more of a collectivistic viewpoint, it's what can we do together to try to improve the overall performance of the group. So it's a very different type of mindset. And study after study have shown that really successful groups have a more collectivistic mindset, and they will give up individual goals in order to achieve group overall goals. And they will help. I mean, every group has really strong members and really weak members in all kinds of different areas. The strong ones help the weak ones to survive or to succeed as well, and to feel like they are all part of the group. So the mindset is all about we, not individualistic mindset. So how do we adapt to that in a group when we've got more of a individualistic view? There's a few things that we can do, and the book goes into more detail than I'm going to right now, but there's things that we can do. Embrace diversity. The more you have different points of view, different sets of eyes, different cultural backgrounds, different belief systems involved in a group, you've got all these different viewpoints coming together. People from one area might see a flaw or an error, or, oh, could lead us to something bad that other people don't see, because we all have our collective groups, or our individualistic and collectivistic sight, and it's based on our own personal cultures. And it's very hard to see how someone from another culture might see it, and they see something and they go, oh, well, look, it's this. And you're like, oh, why didn't I see that? Well, it's because you've got a little bit of a cultural difference there. So the really good groups are multicultural, very diverse groups. And the more diversity you can add, the better off typically your group is. Also, you want to reduce uncertainty. Groups spend a lot of time building, and you're going to get into this in some of the upcoming chapters. groups spend a lot of time building relationships with each other to reduce the uncertainty. I don't know how the other members of the group are going to act on day one in a group, and you're going to have this next week when you're in your groups. You won't know these other people in your groups. You won't know how they act and what their strengths are and all that stuff. So groups will try to reduce all of that stuff and get to know each other really well. So they know that, oh, this person's really good at this, and this person's really good at this, and this person's not very good at this. Will help them with that. And then they can help us with what they're really good at. You want to cut out as much of the uncertainty and unknowing as you can as far as each of the members in the group, because overall, the better you know the group as a whole, the better your chances are to succeed. You also want to listen. And this next phrase is so true. No one ever insulted individuals from another culture by actively listening to them. Listening, if you took Comm 102, listening is one of the best ways to reduce conflict. And that was talked about in the book in 102, interpersonal communication. You can't over listen to somebody. And in fact, it helps break down a lot of barriers. Sometimes the more you listen, the more you learn. The more you learn, the more communication competent you become. So in the groups, you want to spend time listening to everybody, listen to everybody's point of view, because you never know where that next breakthrough is going to come from. You also don't want to stereotype. Don't judge a book by its cover. It should be second nature by now, but we are horrible at doing it. I think we're partially hardwired to look at people and go, oh, they fit in this group, and oh, they fit in this group. Like somebody likes a certain kind of music, and so okay, they're this kind of person. Somebody likes this kind of food, they're this kind of person. We do stuff like that because we, as beings, we categorize everything. You want to try to avoid that, because because somebody looks a certain way doesn't mean they're going to fit whatever you think that pattern is going to be. And they could really surprise you. I can remember when I was working at a company down in Georgia for a while, we had a guy who was extremely, what I would say is nerdy looking. And he was very by the book, by the rules. You know, he drove one of the very, very first early electric cars. It was I think it was like a Honda Accent was the name of it. It was just ugly as sin, and it didn't go very fast. And anyway, he had this car, and he had this image about him as being a complete and total nerd, introvert, never got out. And in reality, he was a huge heavy metal fan. He loved riding motorcycles. He was really into Harley Davidsons. Looking at him at work, you would never see any of this stuff. And it was almost like he was a completely different person. So you don't want to stereotype people when you first especially get into the groups, because you don't know what people are until you get to listen to them and learn about them. And then there's employ the platinum rule. Now, we've all heard the golden rule. Do unto others as you would want them to do to you, right? That's sort of an individualistic, point of view, because not all cultures view things the same way. And so the platinum rule is treat others as they want to be treated. Listen to them, learn about them, find out how they want to be treated. It may be very different than anything you've encountered before, but have the respect for them to treat them the way they wish to be treated. And then overall, the harmony is better in the group, and you learn a lot more about diversity and cultures and that kind of thing, the people that you are working with in these groups. You also need to learn to style shift. You need to learn to be flexible for the different people that are in your groups. The more flexibility the group has, the more the ability for the group overall to succeed and accomplish whatever goals they're after. There is so much more that we could talk about, but I'm probably way over my 10-minute target time already. And there's a lot of this is covered in the book. So this is just one of those quick tips. I may try to get another one up, but we're already close to the end of the week. So I may just shift my focus to next week as well. Be sure to go through chapter 1, because a lot of that is really important as you put your groups together. I'm going to do that as soon as I get done recording this. I'm going to put everybody in their groups, and I'll put an announcement out next week. You start meeting the people that you're in the groups with to do the group work for the class. And you'll want to use some of the things in chapter 1 to help make your group successful and get the best overall grade you can. So that's it for this quick tip. If you got any questions, shoot me an email. I'll see you later.